We can now start to fill out the Condition Assessment tab. This is where we record all the information about the disturbances and threats affecting the archaeology. The first box we fill out is Condition State Type. Click on Type and a drop-down list will appear. Ask yourself, given the most up-to-date information, what is the overall condition of the site? Once you've selected an appropriate term, click Add and the value will appear below the box. We can then move on to Disturbance Extent. Again, click on Type and a drop-down list will appear. Ask yourself, what is the overall extent or area of the site that has been affected by the different disturbances you can identify? If you by mistake click on the wrong value, simply go to the Discard Edit button and then reselect the relevant value from the drop-down list. Once you've done this, press Add. We can then fill in a little bit more detail about the different disturbance causes, cause certainty, the effects those causes have had, up to 5, a disturbance type and a date type. Let's start off by entering a disturbance cause. Here, if we click on cause, a drop-down list appears and we can scroll through the list and choose the most appropriate term for what we can see on the imagery or what is reported to us from a source of information. Always check back to the glossary to make sure you've got the right term. We can then select a certainty, and this indicates how sure we are that we've got that disturbance cause right, so we've identified it correctly. In this case, we have medium certainty. We can then go on to list up to 5 effects per disturbance cause, and for each effect we must also identify an effect certainty. So how sure are we that we've identified that effect correctly? Here we're going to list another effect, so effect 2, by clicking on the box and scrolling down the list. And remember, you can always check back to the glossary if you've got any questions. Then go and select effect 2 certainty, so how sure are we that we've identified that effect 2 correctly? We can then leave the remaining boxes blank. We then select an overall disturbance type, so why is this disturbance happening? With this, we've selected development. We can then define when the event or the disturbance cause happened. Occurred before, occurred between, or occurred on. In this case, we've gone occurred before. This means that we've got imagery or a source of information where we know the development or the structural robbing in this case is visible. So we know it has to have happened before that date. In this case, it has to have happened before the 6th of the 5th, 2017. Once we're happy, we can add all those values and double check them as they appear below the disturbance state define records. In many cases, we'll have more than one disturbance cause per site. And so when we're adding another disturbance cause, we simply go back to the top and start doing some more data entry. Select on the various boxes and drop-down lists will appear. And always remember that you must identify a certainty for the cause, but also for the effects 1 to 5 where you're recording them. If you're in doubt of any of the values or the meaning of any of the terms, just check back to the glossaries and there you'll find a definition in English and in Arabic of what we mean by these different terms. Here we have high certainty that construction was occurring, and we've listed up to 3 effects of the effects that this disturbance causes is contributing to. So loss of archaeological material, collapse, structural damage and access restriction. Once we're happy with that, we can again go and select a type, in this case development, and we can select a period of time. In this case, we've selected occurred between. In this case, in the date that goes in the from box, we know that that construction is not visible on this date. So this is likely from a corona image dating to 1970. However, by the time it gets to the date in the to box, we can see the construction. And so we know that that construction must have taken place before these 2 dates, so between 1970 and between the 8th of the 6th, 2017. Again, press Add and all the values will appear below. Let's enter in one more disturbance caused here, excavation and classified. And again, remember we have to do the cause certainty. In this case, we don't know the effects of the excavation, so we can simply add unknown and not applicable as the effect 1 certainty. We then don't fill out effect 2 to 5. We can, however, fill out the disturbance type, and in this case it's archaeological, so archaeological excavations. And we can specify when these archaeological excavations took place. So in this case, we know it was before a certain date, and we can actually interact with the calendar and select this date using the calendar drop down if we wish to, or alternatively we can also type it in. So here we're entering a record that says we know that excavation or archaeological excavations took place prior to the 6th of the 5th, 2017, but we're not sure what effects that archaeological excavation or those archaeological excavations had on the archaeology. We can now fill out the threat assessment, and this is recording anything that we think might become a disturbance to the archaeology within 3 to 5 years. Here we've entered construction, and you'll notice that when you click in the boxes that very similar values come up. The only difference here is the cause certainty assessment. These are slightly different values. So if we use this one as an example for ploughing, we can click on cause and select ploughing from the list, but then our cause certainty will either be possible, probable, planned or not applicable. In this case, we've selected possible. If once you've added all those values, you want to go back and add another threat cause, simply carry on adding different values into the boxes. And remember, you have to add a certainty and also an overall threat type, so those are agricultural or development. Once you've added all your condition state, your disturbance extent, your disturbance assessments and your threat assessments, do a double check of everything, and once you're happy, press the green Save Edits button that can be found at both the top and the bottom of the page on the right hand side. Once you've done this, and if at any point you want to come back and add additional information, so for example another threat assessment, simply navigate back to this tab and continue to do data entry in the boxes provided. Again, once you've selected the terms from the drop-down list, you can press Add and then Save Edits. This is how we fill out the Condition Assessment tab, and we can now move on to looking at some other parts of the database.